can refer to a lot of things. It can refer to the entire process, so on and so forth. But in actually bringing about regeneration, that this is a monergistic act. It is not a cooperative act, because regeneration brings spiritual life. And the Bible is very, very plain, very, very clear. Those who are according to the flesh cannot submit themselves to the law of God. They cannot do what is pleasing to God. Repentance and faith is pleasing to God. The Bible is plain. It's clear. I've never heard anybody, I've heard lots of folks deny this, but I've never heard anyone provide a meaningful interpretation of Romans chapter 8 to get around the plain statement that is being made there. And so when we're talking about monergism and synergism, we're talking about that initial act of bringing about the spiritual life of God's elect people. We're not saying that in sanctification there is not the activity of the Spirit of God within the spirit of man, causing us to want to love the things of God, or all the rest of that kind of stuff. Again, rejection of categories that allow for meaningful theological communication that have been established for centuries and centuries, just simply to create such a simplified and silly presentation that it's easy to mock. That's all you have here. Now, if your purpose is mockery, then that's what you're going to do. If your purpose is the glorification of God and the presentation of His truth, then you're not going to do that. And we've been consistent. No matter what anybody says, the Potter's Freedom accurately, fully represented Norman Geisler's perspective, without question. No one has ever, I've been accused many times, but not anyone who's ever accused me of misrepresenting Geisler, when faced with me, could come up with anything. They just would melt into a puddle. It's really easy to say, but the reality is that those who've read both books know that I bent over backwards to accurately represent the other side. That's all there is to it. The reason I did that, out of respect for Norman Geisler, is also that when you accurately represent the other side, when you then refute their arguments, that refutation is extremely strong. If you do not represent the other side accurately, then your refutation of their lesser arguments can be greatly weakened by someone who actually knows what their best arguments were. So if you really do believe that what you're saying is the truth, then represent the other side's strongest arguments, not their weakest ones. Just how we've operated for a long time.
Yet he goes and makes a universal determinism, and then he starts to backpedal by saying he's a compatibilist. That's right out of the philosophers, not all Christian, but that's right out of the philosophy of the middle of the second millennium. And these philosophers debated compatibilism, and it's right out of classical apologetics or natural theology. And that's the contradiction. I'm a presuppositionalist, but to prove to you I'm going to use natural theology to prove it.
Now, of course, once again, Brother Tassi has completely failed at this point. That's not natural theology. He has mystifying monergism, mystifying synergism. He's mystifying all the categories in which spoken, and has not once quoted my book to establish any of these things, ignoring the fact that my argumentation was actually extremely biblical at this point, and I established this through exegesis, which is what has made the book have lasting impact. The book's, 15 years old now, 15, 16 years old, and it's still having an impact along these lines. They're just, he may be smiling, and the people in the audience may be going, yeah, that James White's a real idiot. The problem is, if they actually read the book, they're going to discover that Brother Tassi wasn't even representing what I was saying, even with a smidgen of accuracy. Not even a little teeny iota. and anyone's read the book knows that.
And he goes, and the Westminster and Reformed Confessions of Faith say God causes everything but not the author of evil, and it establishes secondary causes. Secondary causes is a science called efficacy, and it is studied to determine the cause and effect of everything, and it is a scientific method in natural theology.
But it's also a biblical category that long preceded any modern philosophical discussion of the issue. Do philosophers discuss these things? Yes. Are you falling into the trap of so many Arminians, it seems, of drawing connections without providing the foundation for those connections? It seems very much that is the case. And again, there wasn't any need for this if a fair reading of the Potter's Freedom would have been undertaken.
Can't you see the blatant contradictions? It's dishonest.
Blatant contradictions. We've discovered that there have been none. There have been numerous errors made on Brother Tassie's part. And then we move from the allegation of contradiction based upon his own redefinition of terms to the accusation of dishonesty on my part. And you never get used to it, but after a while, it's just sort of like, there we go again. And people say, does it ever bother you how many people will go personal and start the ad hominem and stuff like that? And I don't ever want to become accustomed to it, but at the same time, I only give the weight that the argumentation deserves. And this argumentation is non-existent, so it deserves no weight. So it's just sort of like, I'm really sorry you feel that way, but the fact of the matter is you haven't established any of the foundations that you think you've established. And so, my hope is that there can be movement forward and learning in regards to these issues.
Because if you say, oh, okay, if you want to talk about natural theology, James White, you do it poorly. First of all, you're wrong about it. But since you played that card, let's talk about it. And it doesn't establish true secondary causes the way they define how God knows. But that's the trick. That's the sleight of hand. It's the movement of the card that causes you to go, oh, okay. Because we never studied it. People like me don't talk about it very much. And we're all caught in these confusions and contradictions, and pretty soon you're going, wow, I like that. God caused my evil? That's pretty cool. The name of James White's book, instead of Potter's Freedom, it should be titled Freedom to Blame the Potter. Because he moves from statements of universal determinism, and then without blinking an eye, he invokes compatibilism and secondary causes, which are synergism, and now man is cooperating with God.